pregnant, burial, divorce, inked, mud, silence. The sequence entered the ledger at 10:14 a.m., time-stamped by rain and the sound of earth collapsing into itself. The domestic unit had been weakened for months, but this was the moment of visible liquidation. The husband, hereafter the antagonist, chose the burial as his execution window. This decision will later be categorized as a strategic miscalculation with compounding interest. The setting was optimized for dominance. A cemetery offers asymmetric leverage. Grief dampens resistance. Witnesses are muted by etiquette, and the target is already kneeling. The antagonist wore a black coat cut to signal sobriety and resolve. He mistook stillness for surrender. He mistook biology for weakness. The protagonist, hereafter the silent heiress, stood at the edge of the open grave, her center of gravity compromised by a late-stage pregnancy. The biological asset was visible, undeniable, and, in the antagonist's flawed model, depreciating. He had run the numbers privately. Pregnancy meant distraction, risk, reduced market mobility. The mother's body below ground meant social capital collapse. No matriarch, no shield, no inheritance worth auditing. The antagonist believed the system had reached terminal decline. He produced the documents without ceremony, a thin folder, no condolences, no delay. This was not cruelty, as common belief would later suggest. Cruelty implies emotion. This was a premature liquidation executed by a man convinced he was early, not wrong. He spoke in a low register designed to sound merciful. He referenced inevitability. He referenced reality. He referenced the future as if it were a closed file. The silent heiress did not interrupt. She did not cry. She did not ask for time. These absences were logged as weakness by the antagonist and as data by the system. Rain soaked the paper. Ink bled slightly at the edges. The antagonist noticed and frowned, irritated by the inefficiency. He offered a pen. The silent heiress signed. This act would later be misinterpreted as capitulation. In truth, it was compliance with an audit she had not yet initiated. The grave was filled. The marriage was voided. The fetus shifted, a reminder of ongoing biological computation. The antagonist left first, confident. He believed he had escaped a sinking ship. He did not know he had abandoned the hull while standing on a gold mine. This chapter closes with a clean line item: domestic unit, liquidated, asset value, misread. Common belief would later insist that divorcing a pregnant wife at her mother's burial constituted emotional barbarism. The forensic record disagrees. Emotion did not drive the antagonist. He acted under the illusion of clarity. The history paradox emerges when narrative sentiment collides with balance sheets. On one side, a man leaving a grieving pregnant woman at a funeral. On the other, a man executing what he believes to be a rational divestment from declining assets. The paradox is not moral, it is computational. The antagonist's private audit was simple. The silent heiress had entered a biological deficit. Pregnancy limited her labor flexibility and increased dependency ratios. The maternal line, previously assumed to be modest, opaque, and geographically distant, had been written off years prior. The mother was categorized as sentimental ballast, not capital. Her death, therefore, registered as neutral to slightly positive. Fewer obligations, fewer holidays, fewer opinions. The antagonist's model excluded dark pools. He did not investigate trusts, shell entities, or the long tail of family law executed quietly over decades. He did not ask why the mother's lifestyle never matched her reported income. He did not question the sealed meetings, the offshore travel, the lawyers who never attended holidays. These omissions would later be classified as negligent due diligence. The silent heiress, for her part, had been trained in silence, not submission, containment. Her mother had taught her that visibility attracts extraction. Wealth, like grief, is safest when unperformed. The daughter internalized this protocol. She married beneath the ledger deliberately. The antagonist interpreted this as luck. At the burial, the silent heiress received no notification. The inheritance had not yet been triggered publicly. Probate had been bypassed years earlier. The inheritance reset was scheduled, automated, and irreversible, but it required time. The antagonist believed timing was on his side. He did not understand latency. When he left the cemetery, he believed he had closed a chapter. In reality, he had opened a discrepancy. Systems do not punish malice, they punish bad math. The silent heiress returned home alone. The house felt smaller, not emptier, just poorly allocated. She experienced the ground-level suffering the audit demands: swollen ankles, nausea, the physical mathematics of carrying weight without leverage. This suffering was not romanticized, it was logged. Pain does not negate value, it obscures it. That night, a call arrived from a number she recognized but had not saved. The voice was procedural. Condolences were delivered efficiently. Then, the data. The mother's death had activated the final clause. The trusts were unlocked, the controlling interest transferred. The figure was stated once, clearly, without flourish: 500 million. The silent heiress did not react outwardly. Reaction is noise. She asked one question: timeline. The answer was precise: weeks, not months. The system was already moving. The antagonist slept well that night. Confidence often masquerades as rest. By morning, the domestic unit was fully dissolved in practice, if not yet in public record. The antagonist began the rebranding phase. He informed colleagues with rehearsed gravity. He framed the divorce as mutual, necessary, adult. He omitted the burial. He omitted the pregnancy. These omissions were tactical, but insufficient. The silent heiress initiated no contact. Silence is not absence, it is positioning. She moved through her days with reduced footprint. She canceled nothing. She requested nothing. She complied with every interim demand. This behavior further confirmed the antagonist's belief that he had exited cleanly. Behind the scenes, the inheritance reset advanced. Boards convened without press. Accounts shifted ownership silently. Legal instruments updated their language to include a child not yet born. The fetus became a line item with projected yield. The relational liquidation was complete, but the audit was not. Systems remember who divested early and why. The antagonist had not merely left, he had broadcast his assumptions. He had declared what he believed had value and what did not. This declaration would later be replayed, clause by clause, when the system corrected him. For now, the ledger remained quiet. Quiet is not mercy, it is preparation. The silent heiress waited. Understood. I'm going to correct the breach and proceed properly, without summarization, without compression, and without breaking persona or protocol. This is not an outline and not a recap. This is a full forensic chapter written at density in continuous cinematic prose as originally specified. I will resume cleanly at Chapter 4 and execute it at full weight. Subsequent chapters can follow in later turns to preserve integrity and avoid truncation. The betrayal did not escalate, it clarified. It arrived as paper because paper is how systems communicate when they no longer respect you enough for conversation.
The courier appeared 3 days after the burial, precisely timed to exploit decay. Grief has a half-life. The antagonist believed he understood it. He believed the silent heiress would still be pliable, still submerged in procedural fog, still operating under emotional latency. The envelope was unbranded. No flowers, no condolences, only legal mass. Inside, a revised custody framework drafted before the child was born, a motion demanding accelerated disclosure of marital contributions, and a supplemental filing seeking to reclassify her domestic labor as non-material. Each page was aggressive without being loud. This was not rage, this was optimization. The context was unmistakable. The antagonist had concluded that his earlier liquidation had been incomplete. He had exited the marriage, but he had not extracted enough value on the way.
She did not seek his eyes. Eye contact would have suggested symmetry. She took the seat opposite him, body angled slightly away, posture stable despite the gravitational demand of late pregnancy. The biological asset was no longer framed as burden. In this room, it read as continuity embodied. The big boss began without preamble. He spoke of review, of alignment, of fiduciary exposure. His voice was even, uninvested, lethal in its neutrality. He referenced timelines without interpretation, placing events on the table like instruments. Each date corresponded to a decision the antagonist had believed inconsequential at the time. Divorce filing, asset motion, narrative outreach, custodial language drafted pre-birth. The antagonist attempted to interject. He smiled reflexively, an artifact from earlier iterations of power. The big boss did not acknowledge the interruption. Silence swallowed the attempt whole. Documents were distributed. Not accusations, records. Ownership charts, email transcripts, filing timestamps. The antagonist's own language appeared, stripped of context, and therefore stripped of intention. Systems do not care what you meant, they care what you did and when. The domestic unit appeared briefly, a minor subsystem in a larger structure. Its liquidation had not triggered scrutiny, its mismanagement had. The antagonist began to understand the shape of the room too late. This was not arbitration, this was an audit's closing session. The big boss gestured once toward the silent Harris. Permission granted. She spoke. Her voice was steady, low, uninflected by grief or triumph. She identified herself not relationally, but operationally. Executor, controlling interest holder, authorized representative. Each title recalibrated the antagonist's internal hierarchy until none remained intact. She corrected errors without commentary. She clarified asset structures he had dismissed as ceremonial. She outlined latency mechanisms he had mistaken for absence. She referenced clauses he had never read because he had assumed relevance followed visibility. She explained clinically how his premature liquidation had triggered safeguards designed precisely for men who confuse access with entitlement. She addressed the divorce only briefly. Timing, she said, matters. The burial, she said, had been noted. The pregnancy, she said, had been documented, not as cruelty, as judgment. She did not accuse him of malice. Malice would have personalized the failure. She framed his actions as analytical errors, misread incentives, ignored contingencies, flawed audits. This language stripped him of the moral high ground he had never realized he was standing on. He tried again to speak. This time, the big boss raised a finger. Interruption denied. The forensic hammer fell without sound. The silent Harris explained that the signature he had pursued no longer mattered. The corridor had been rerouted. The account had closed without his involvement. The access he believed he needed had already been revoked at the system level. She concluded with a single sentence, delivered without emphasis. Future communications would proceed without him. Silence followed. Not awkward silence, terminal silence. The big boss closed the file. Closure is not metaphorical in these rooms, it is literal. Pages align, folders shut, authority withdraws. He thanked the antagonist for his time. Time here meant relevance already spent. The meeting ended. No escort, no confrontation, no raised voices. The antagonist stood alone in a room that had already moved on. His phone vibrated once, then again. Notifications cascading without explanation, systems syncing their decisions. As he exited, the glass walls reflected him at fragmented angles. No single image held. This is what liquidation looks like before the numbers finalize. Behind him, the silent Harris remained seated, hands resting on the curve of continuity, breathing evenly. The system no longer required her presence, but it acknowledged her authority by not rushing her exit. 0 hour passed, not as explosion, but as subtraction. The antagonist left the building lighter than he had entered. Not relieved, reduced. The audit advanced toward its final phase.